Hi, I'm Leah Bailey, and I want to thank you for returning to my page and for supporting the project I've started with Between Hindsight and Foresight. My poetry collection will be released on the 9th of May 2020, and I'll be doing a live video on the release day, but until then, I have decided to make these videos that give you the story behind some of the poems. Now, last week I talked about a newer poem in the collection. This time I'm going to talk to you about one of the early poems in the collection. This is the second poem in the collection. It's called Journeys, and it was written when I was a teenager. The way that Journeys was written is in public, in a coffee shop. And a lot of the poems that I've written since then have been written in a pub, in a bar, in a coffee shop, somewhere out in the world where there's other people around. Whether I'm with people or not, I almost always have something to write with, something to write on, because the energy of being out and in the world and seeing people watching, seeing them interact does get quite inspiring for me. Even when I'm by myself and I'm sitting and soaking in the quiet in a restaurant or on a walk, that sometimes brings out an idea. That was the case for this poem. When I was a teenager, I used to work in a mobile phone store in the summer, and it was at a shopping center that had a huge cinema and a coffee shop, the Beanery, and I know that now, a couple of decades later, the coffee shop isn't there, the mobile phone shop isn't there, the cinema is still there, thankfully, but Warrington Crossing has changed a lot in that time. Now, in this particular instance, the coffee shop was doing some live music. It was a guitarist who was playing the acoustic guitar. I believe he was playing his music. Not all of the music had lyrics, though. So it was a great environment to be writing in with another artist and with people enjoying themselves and being out in the evening, just having a cup of coffee. As the guitarist was playing an instrumental song, it was kind of pacey. It kept moving. It wasn't a rock song. It wasn't like really hyperactively fast moving, but it did have a kind of rhythm to it and a repeating refrain that started to inspire me. And as I was sitting there and closing my eyes and listening to the music, I decided to try and capture some of the images that were running through my mind. On the piece of paper that I started writing Journeys, I couldn't get the ideas down fast enough. And I'm sure the other writers in the world and those watching the video or those who know me very well know that capturing those ideas as quickly as they come to you is sometimes very difficult. They tend to slip away. They try to get away from you. But this time I was absolutely determined to capture what my imagination was showing me. So through the instrumental music, I felt like I was sitting on a train. And I didn't ride the train very often as a teenager, but when I did, it was always special. It was always interesting. Seeing into people's lives, seeing into people's backyards, and just in a split-second instant moving on and moving on and moving on. So as I started writing down those images that I saw in my mind, I started to shape the image from a literal picture of what was going on a train journey to a kind of figurative journey, which I think is kind of apt for what's happening now. And I think that is kind of apt for what I'm doing with this project, because I've wanted to publish poems for somewhere around 20 years. After a while, I did get all the images down, the song ended, and as I looked at it and looked over it, it was free verse, and it was very long for me at the time, and it just jumbled of images. And this is where my teacher brain takes over. Both my parents are teachers, some of my favorite people are teachers, a lot of my friends are teachers, so you all know what happens when a teacher gets hold of something that they want to form into a more technical thing. I rewrote the poem so that it rhymed. I rewrote the poem so that it formed verses. But when you read the poem, you need to understand that Journeys is symbolic, it's metaphorical, it's imaginative, but it's kind of a spirit journey rather than an actual journey. It talks about all that uncertainty and all of that need to just keep going and see what's next. It's so important to just think about what's next. Remember where you came from and look at the stuff behind you, but also there is so much adventure there in the next day and the next day and the next day. And it becomes that kind of rhythmic tic-tac that happens with a train going over the tracks. Now, the other thing I want you to remember and understand when you see the poem and when you read the poem is that you may not understand all of the poem. I have drafted and redrafted the poem at least 3 times, and I felt the need to play with words and to mix it up a little bit. A lot of the poems in the collection you'll see are very strict, they're very technical, they fit a particular form. With this poem, I kind of stretched myself, even as a teenager, trying to create something that was more imaginative, that reflects how I felt when I listened to the music, that reflected what my mind did when I started writing down the ideas. So even though it rhymes, even though it's got a structure now, you're not going to understand the whole poem. And you're not really meant to understand the whole poem. What the poem is meant to do is to take you on the same journey that I went through when I was listening to music. What you're meant to do with the poem is to let your own mind and imagination wander and think about what could be around the next bend in the train tracks. And you're meant to think about all those little stops on the way, no matter how many of those stops it is. It's kind of apt that this is early on in the collection because that is what I'm asking you to do with my poetry collection. I'm asking you to come on a journey with me, come walk with me, and look at the different moments that were on my train journey, my steps, my moments in time. Some of them you might recognize, some of them might be new places for you, but I try to capture a moment in time and pin it to the page and share it with you. So that is the story behind Journeys, the second poem in the collection. That is my story for this week. Please keep an eye on the page. Very, very, very soon, there's going to be a link for pre-ordering the book before the release on the 9th of May. And if you know anyone that likes poetry, that might be interested, please, please, please share the page, share the videos. I wrote them so we could share. Okay? Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope to see you again, and hopefully we'll all make the train.